If 2025 could be carried in a single object, it might look like this: black as obsidian, sharp as a secret.
Ow.
But it isn't stone. It's the afterimage of a human mind, boiled, blown to vapor, then flash frozen into glass by a volcanic inferno 2,000 years ago. A vitrified brain, one of the year's strangest discoveries. And it fractures. It's the story we thought we knew about that ancient disaster. But that's only the first whisper. Tonight we follow the echoes under the hills. A prehistoric world hiding from a bruised sky. An Iron Age treasure laid down like a warding prayer. And a language that set out from deep Siberia 4,500 years ago and still rides the breath of those who speak it. Light a small lamp, walk soft. These are whispered chronicles, echoes of forgotten lore. We begin in Herculaneum, the Roman city buried in the year 79 AD alongside Pompeii by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. In the year 79 AD, the Roman city of Herculaneum was buried in a catastrophic eruption of Mount Vesuvius alongside its better-known neighbor Pompeii. But while Pompeii was covered in a thick layer of ash that preserved its buildings and its residents in a hardened shell of ancient life, Herculaneum was buried by slower-moving, lower-temperature, pyroclastic flows. These flows are what geologists call a lahar, a debris flow containing a mixture of hot ash, rock, and gas. And they're responsible for most of the destruction in Herculaneum. As these lahars swept through the city, they would have cooked the people in their path, turning their bodies into mummies that were leathery and dry, like the famous example found at the nearby Stabian baths. But one young man wasn't turned into a mummy. He was laid to rest on a wooden bed in the Collegium Augustaleum, a prestigious Roman academy for discussion and debate, seemingly spared from the worst of the eruption. His name was Gaius Caesar. We know that because an inscription on a nearby pillar names him and tells us he died at 20 years old. Scholars think he was a guard stationed at the building. And judging by the coins found nearby, he died at his post during the second or third lahar, even though the pillar says he died on the first. Archaeologists first discovered this unusual burial in 1864, but it took until 1964 for them to excavate it fully. And everyone was puzzled by a strange feature of the skeleton. The fragments were so hard that the archaeologists couldn't scratch them with a steel file. And they were clearly part of the man, not something that had lodged in his head after death, like an insect, because they were fused to his jawbone. But the mystery remained until 2025, when a new study finally proposed an answer. The key to solving it was figuring out how the brain became this literal lump of coal. Brains don't turn to stone the way that other tissues do. If there was any movement after the brain was initially heated up, that would destroy the effect. So the only way this brain could become so perfectly preserved is if it was flash frozen, a process called vitrification. And for that to happen, the temperature had to rise extremely quickly, reaching 510 degrees Celsius, or over 950 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the temperature of a bonfire, hot enough to turn wood to charcoal and human flesh to ash. But such temperatures can also preserve things almost instantly, like pieces of fruit that can be turned into colorful gems called obsidian. This means that when Vesuvius erupted, something superheated must have blasted into Herculaneum with incredible force. Hot enough to cook the man's brain and then flash freeze it in place before it had a chance to move. The result? Human brain, instantly and uniquely preserved as organic glass. Now we know that Herculaneum was hit by a series of lahars, but the material that makes lahars can only reach temperatures of around 300 degrees Celsius or 570 Fahrenheit. Pyroclastic flows from other volcanoes have been clocked at much higher temperatures, but not this kind of instantaneous heat. So what could have caused this sudden blast? Well, the researchers proposed that the brain was heated by a silent, brief, and scorching thermal wave, a sort of invisible shockwave that seared everything in its path before vanishing. And while we may never know for sure, this discovery forced scientists to re-examine what happened during Vesuvius's eruption and when. Previously, scholars thought that the first lahar struck Herculaneum around 18 hours after the initial explosion. But the thermal wave would have arrived much sooner, within 10 minutes. In fact, this discovery raises a lot more questions. For example, how big was this thermal wave, and how far did it travel? And why has it taken so long for something like this to be noticed? The researchers say that it might have been overlooked because it only affected a small area of Herculaneum. Still, it's clear that the thermal wave was a significant event in the history of the eruption. Studying these secrets helps us understand our world today and prepare for the future. It's a chilling reminder that the past often holds a secret more complex and violent than we first imagine. From the flash heat of a Roman catastrophe, we travel 2,000 years and thousands of miles north to the deep, wet earth of what is now Yorkshire, England. Here, a different kind of mystery was unearthed. In 1996, an amateur archaeologist found some burnt material on a farm field near the village of Melsonby. Subsequent excavations uncovered over 800 objects, including 400 pieces of burnt material carefully deposited in a large pit. Archaeologists have called it the most significant Iron Age find in the UK for a generation. Its significance only became clear as the analysis deepened. The objects had been ritually destroyed, mostly bent, broken, and even burned. They included chariot fittings, wheels, horseshoes, sickles, agricultural tools, and hundreds of other domestic items. Most remarkably, the finds suggest the presence of at least 7 four-wheeled wagons, a type of vehicle previously unknown to have existed in Iron Age Britain. Were these wagons ceremonial? Funerary? Did they have any connection to the other broken objects? This was not a quick burial, but a massive, almost inconceivable act of conspicuous destruction and hasty deposition. Among the most striking objects were 2 highly decorated vessels. One was a lidded wine-mixing bowl made of iron and decorated with a series of embossed panels. These include a warrior on horseback, a chariot with horses' heads decorated as snarling hounds, a warrior holding a spear, and a fallen warrior attended by 2 women. When compare the subject matter and style of the Melsonby vessels with contemporary Mediterranean art, you can see the influence of Greek culture on the British Iron Age elite. Their adoption of Greek motifs indicates cosmopolitanism, a sense of being part of a wider Mediterranean world. These people were not isolated. They were connected to wider Mediterranean networks of trade and exchange. They also had a powerful artistic tradition, which they may have been trying to express to a wider audience. It was not uncommon for Iron Age elites across Europe to display their wealth and power through their consumption of luxury goods, including wine. Wine was both a drink of the gods and a symbol of wealth. It was also a key ingredient in the mixing bowl. Wine was mixed with water before serving. The mixing bowl was an essential part of any dinner party. It would have been used to mix wine with water in preparation for a feast, possibly in honor of important guests. The excavations revealed that the 2 vessels had been deliberately smashed. The lid was broken into 3 pieces, and the bowl itself was fractured and scorched. It seems likely that the destruction was carried out before the vessels were placed in the ground. The whole scene was one of conspicuous consumption and deliberate destruction. This must have been a very important sight to the people who lived around here. But why? What was going on here? Who were the people who lived here? The people who buried this hoard were the Brigantes tribe. Brigantes were one of the most powerful tribes in northern England during the Iron Age, at their peak in the late Iron Age. They controlled territory from the Scottish borders to the Humber estuary. They were a wealthy tribe who traded extensively with the Mediterranean world. We know a lot about them because one of their hill forts was excavated by archaeologists in the 1960s. They found over 100 roundhouses, 3,000 animal bones, and an array of domestic and imported goods. One of the most remarkable finds was a collection of over 2,000 Iron Age coins. The discovery demonstrated the extent of Brigantes' wealth and their involvement in long-distance trade. They were also known to the Romans as fierce fighters. According to Roman accounts, they resisted the Roman invasion of Britain for decades. But ultimately, they were defeated and incorporated into the Roman province of Britannia. The date of the hoard has been variously suggested as being anywhere between 400 BC and the Augustan period, which would place it at the time of the Roman conquest of Britain in the 1st century AD. The bulk of the evidence suggests a date sometime in the late Iron Age or during the early stages of the Roman conquest. Was this a single event or a series of events? It seems likely that there was a single, dramatic event that prompted the ritual destruction of the wagons and the deposition of the hoard. What was this event? Could have been the death of a local chieftain or a crisis such as a famine or a natural disaster. Alternatively, It could have been the arrival of the Romans and the impending destruction of their culture and way of life. The latter explanation is supported by the fact that similar hoards were found throughout Roman Britain, suggesting a widespread phenomenon of conspicuous destruction. The Brigantes were ultimately defeated by the Romans, but their story need not have ended there. In death, their chieftains might have become immortal. As long as their memory endured in the minds of their people, they continued to exist in a sense. The same cannot be said of the Roman invaders. Some of their legions would go on to become the emperor's bodyguard, and the eagles of several legions were taken as booty by the Brigantes. But the eagle was a symbol of Jupiter, the supreme god of the Roman pantheon. To take it was to strike a blow against the heart of Rome, and when the legion was raised, its eagles were replaced and its soldiers went home. In their stead, Rome raised a new legion. For centuries, the name of the Brigantes struck fear into the hearts of the Roman invaders, but no trace of it survives today. The Brigantes were one of the most powerful and mysterious tribes in Iron Age Britain. Their story is a reminder of the complexity of the pre-Roman British landscape and the richness of their material culture. It's a message 2,000 years in the sending, a powerful northern elite, capable of incredible artistry, who chose to bury their entire material legacy rather than surrender it to the wind or the looming empire. We wind the tape further back, far past the Iron Age, past the pyramids, all the way to a time when Homo sapiens was locked in a bitter struggle for survival against our cousins, the Neanderthals. We go back 41,000 years. When you hear stories about ancient humans battling dangerous animals or rival tribes, it can be easy to forget that we were fighting another kind of enemy too, the environment. Life as a prehistoric Homo sapien would have been brutal, whether it was freezing cold or baking hot, wet, humid, or parched dry. Each day was a gamble. Would the weather hold? Was there enough food? Would the next season bring bountiful growth or devastating famine? And looming over all of that, a constant threat, the sun. People had little more than intuition and folklore to guide them. That didn't mean they were completely oblivious, though. There is evidence that as far back as 10,000 BCE, our Neolithic ancestors in what is now Spain were using ochre, a natural iron oxide pigment, as a kind of sunscreen. In the Paleolithic era, various human populations across the globe started mixing ochre with animal fat or water and painting it onto themselves. This was probably done for a variety of reasons. But it also turns out that ochre is surprisingly good at absorbing ultraviolet radiation. Fast forward a few thousand years to the Lashem's excursion 41,000 years ago. The Earth's magnetic field, which normally shields us from cosmic and solar radiation, suddenly and dramatically weakened. The poles effectively flipped, and for a few centuries, our planet's protective magnetosphere was just 10% as strong as it is today. The skies turned into a radioactive tempest. Aurora, normally only seen in high-latitude regions, were visible as far south as the equator, and without the magnetic field to filter out deadly radiation from the sun, the Earth was bombarded by dangerous levels of cosmic rays and solar wind. Studies show this radiation caused serious genetic damage, especially in kids, and likely played a big part in the rapid disappearance of Neanderthals. Our closest relatives? They dominated Europe for hundreds of thousands of years, but by the end of the Lachamp excursion, they were gone. For a long time, archaeologists weren't sure what had happened, but in 2025, researchers put forward a radical idea. It wasn't that Neanderthals were stupid or couldn't adapt. Instead, they lacked our capacity for adopting and creating technology. In other words, they didn't have sunscreen. More specifically, they didn't have access to ochre. A new study published this week in the journal PNAS suggests that not only did our ancestors make and use ochre-based sunscreens, but they did so intentionally. The key evidence comes from two ochre pits in Spain's central system, Apasiga and El Castillo, which were both active around the time of the Lachamp excursion. Both sites saw a big jump in activity when the ochre was needed most. Our ancestors were hoarding it, ready for tough times. At the Lachamp site, researchers found traces of ochre in dozens of containers. Some of the containers were small and likely held Finnish sunscreen. Others were much larger and probably contained the raw materials needed to make it. What's more, the team noticed something strange. The ochre was only being used on one side of the containers. The other sides showed no signs of wear or weathering, implying that people brought these containers with them as they traveled. In other words, they weren't just making ochre sunscreen at the site, they were taking it with them. At the El Castillo site, archaeologists uncovered even more evidence of production and use. Here, too, there was a marked increase in ochre exploitation around the time of the Lashimp excursion, along with a big jump in the number of finished items. Together, the two sites tell a compelling story. As the Lashimp magnetic excursion approached, our ancestors began gathering large quantities of ochre, making sunscreen, and then took it with them as they traveled. Now, this isn't the first study to suggest that our ancestors used ochre as a sunscreen. But what makes this one different is the focus on the timing. This is the first time we've connected the dots between the ochre, the Lashimp excursion, and the Neanderthal extinction. And if the sunscreen hypothesis is right, it offers a valuable lesson. It's easy to think of our survival as inevitable. Yes, we adapted and innovated. We had larger brains and made better tools. But the reality was that we were locked in a bitter struggle for survival with our cousins, the Neanderthals, and we needed every advantage we could get. In the end, it may have come down to a basic biological imperative, the simple, life-saving discovery of how to protect ourselves from the very sky above us. Finally, we follow the ultimate echo, the sound of a hidden language, deep in the Siberian permafrost. Scientists recently discovered the oldest sound in the world, an audio recording dating back more than 1,000 years. And now, they can finally tell us what it says. So here it is. That faint, high-pitched pulsing sound might not mean much to you, but it carries a special meaning for me. It's the sound of a secret language, one that has remained hidden until now. You see, we followed the ultimate echo, the sound of a hidden language all the way through time. We traced it from the Ural Mountains in western Russia, where most Uralic languages are spoken today, to the edge of the Arctic Circle, where a tiny indigenous group keeps the flame alive. And in doing so, we uncovered the secrets of one of the great mysteries of human history. Because while the Uralic language family is well known to most linguists, its origins have been hotly debated for more than a century. About 25 million people speak Uralic languages today, including Finnish, Estonian, and Hungarian. But despite their geographic spread, Uralic languages share a remarkable amount of common vocabulary, suggesting they all descend from a single ancestral language. And that means that somewhere, sometime in the distant past, a single group of humans must have spoken a Proto-Uralic tongue. The question is, who were they, and where did they come from? For most of the 20th century, the conventional wisdom held that this mysterious group lived near the Ural Mountains in western Russia. But when that theory failed to account for certain linguistic features, scholars split into two competing camps. Some argued for an eastern origin near the Altai Mountains. Others insisted the ancestral homeland lay further south in the Caucasus. Even today, neither side can claim a decisive victory. But this year, we got a surprising new lead. In 2025, a massive ancient DNA study sequenced 180 ancient Siberian genomes and attempted to answer a different question altogether. Namely, who were the first people to domesticate horses in Siberia and when? Turns out it was neither the Xiongnu nor the Huns, as popularly believed, but a previously unknown group of horse riders who emerged in central Siberia around 4,500 years ago. What's more, these so-called Siberian Bronze Age people were largely genetically isolated from everyone else. They lived in the region of Yakutia, a sparsely populated area of northern central Siberia along the Lena River, and they maintained a closed gene pool for centuries. But just as mysteriously, around 3,500 years ago, they vanished from the genetic record, replaced by a new wave of migrants coming from the south. Here's the thing, though. While this population had little genetic connection to other ancient Siberians, modern-day genetic studies show that many Uralic-speaking groups do share a small percentage of their DNA with Siberian Bronze Age people, specifically those from the Lena River basin. The only plausible explanation is that they descended from this mysterious culture. Now, thanks to this genetic link, we can pinpoint the homeland of the Uralic languages to Yakutia, central Siberia. And according to oral histories, place names, and archaeological finds, The culture thrived in the region of the Lena River Basin. The story goes that after the collapse of the Siberian Bronze Age around 3,500 years ago, the ancestors of modern Uralic speakers migrated west, carrying their language and culture with them all the way to the Arctic Circle. There they encountered another Uralic-speaking group who'd likely split off earlier in the Bronze Age and moved north along the Obi River. Together, these two groups formed what linguists call an Urheimat, or homeland, along the southern shore of the Arctic Circle. But if the ancestral home of Uralic languages was Siberia, how did the languages spread so far south? The answer may lie with one of the most dynamic cultures in prehistory, the Sima-Turbino phenomenon, named after two archaeological sites in Russia's Voronezh and Kirov regions. This mysterious network of early Bronze Age cultures flourished between 4,500 and 3,500 years ago across northern Eurasia. Archaeologists once thought they were dealing with multiple independent cultures, but new genetic evidence suggests otherwise. The Sima-Turbino phenomenon describes a single population and their distinctive material culture, including exquisitely crafted bronze weapons and ornaments, as well as the knowledge to work metals that spread rapidly across northern Eurasia. What sparked this quick cultural shift and expansion? Well, a recent study points to hypermobility. Researchers dug into the social setup of the Sima-Turbino phenomenon and found they were supermobile, egalitarian society with no permanent settlements, no chiefs, and no social classes. Instead, this prehistoric tribe consisted of dozens of extended families who traveled together in large groups, setting up camp wherever conditions were best for gathering wild foods and hunting large game. With their superior bronze weapons, they could hunt large animals like wild horses and reindeer, whose hides could then be used to make shelters and clothing. Because these groups were so mobile, they quickly spread across the vast distances of northern Eurasia. What's more, which would have drastically increased their mobility and allowed them to travel long distances quickly. All told, they formed the largest known prehistoric trading network in the northern hemisphere. And because their trade routes stretched from Scandinavia to Siberia and from the Urals to the Danube, they almost certainly played a major role in spreading Uralic languages as well. So, by following the sound of a hidden language through time, a 4,500-year-old genetic whisper from the deep, Siberian forest was finally loud enough to rewrite a foundational chapter in the history of Europe. 2025 was a year of uncanny revelations. From the horrifying flash-frozen mind of a Roman guard, to the massive, ritualized wealth of Iron Age Britain, to the very genetic defense mechanisms that allowed us to survive a cosmic event. And finally, to a language that crossed an entire continent, carried by ancient Bronze Age traders, who set out from a homeland closer to the Bering Strait than to the nations that speak their language today. These were whispered chronicles, echoes of forgotten lore, old voices carried on the hush of science and discovery. Which of tonight's findings cracked your world the widest? Whisper it down in the comments. If you'd like more echoes, more soft steps in dark places, press subscribe and walk with me. Until next time, keep your lamp trimmed and your questions sharp, and above all else, stay safe.